Yeah, okay.
Oh, you're there.
I don't know.
Just thought I'd start off by showing you a view of where I am here in Copenhagen. People are.
Yes, I was thinking that if it was London, people were not driving on the right side of the road, so it was a bit surprising.
Could have flipped the video. That's a good catch. So you're not feeling 100% what's going on.
Oh, just sick. That's it.
That's not good.
No, it's okay. It's just it means no sleep and then not the same smile or energy, but it's nothing serious, so it's okay.
Okay, that's good. That's good. Feeling a bit different here as well, of course. But it's okay. I had some, I managed to do some work on the plane today. I was working with, I think I need to have a library in Author. Because, you know, as part of writing a serious paper, you need to note down where you come across stuff, right? And for a long time, I've gone into all kinds of different directions. But today I decided all we're going to do is assign a special author document, which is the same as any other one, just looks different, and that's your library.
Yeah.
Then you can use all the fine things. So that was a bit of a breakthrough.
A library as in a list of references or something else?
Primarily that. Hi, Peter.
Good morning.
Morning. Just talking about how today I think I figured out how to have a basic library in Author, which is primarily for references, but you could have notes in there and all kinds of things, because it is really just an author document. But whatever document you're in, whatever you're doing, if you do Command L or click on library, it opens this document and it looks a bit different. So you can add and edit and do what you want. I think that should be a simple solution. So that made me to be happy.
Well, that sounds good. When's it going to be pushed out to everyone?
Well, it has to be made first. But and I, you know, I don't have really anything to invest, but I've decided that now that I've got my PhD, even though I need revisions, I can call myself PhD, which means I should really start marketing Author, because I can do the story of PhD computer science students didn't like the software, made his own, try it. So in that context, I think we need a basic library. As I say, it's a basic library because it's a simple library, because why would you want a complicated one? So hopefully in a month, or roughly. So that's that. No real VR news from this side. other than waiting for Vince to try the rooms we built, and such likes. Oh, let me just hang on 1 second. I apologize. I'm sorry about that. Are we back? Can you hear me?
Yep.
One thing I am considering is to write my own language, my own programming language. It's something I jolted down like 5 or 10 years ago, I forgot. And I mention it because you started to mention the library and let's say your next exciting project now that the PhD is really because they always have to be a next project somehow. But I started to discuss with somebody who already owned their own programming language. They don't have like a wide user base. They have, I think, mostly one user themselves. But yeah, I give myself a 6 months deadline. So if in November you haven't seen something that I would have made with my own programming language, then then I'll post for it. I'll see. And I mention it also because I think it's something that you might be interested, because the basis actually is around a concept that I just learned this weekend. I mean, the concept I already knew 10 years ago, but the name data lineage, I don't know if you're aware of it.
Used to me. I suspect Peter knows.
I'll put it in the chat. And I discovered this from an article on Facebook, and they were saying, oh, if we need to respect GDPR, basically we need to know where the data come from and what the expected usage from the user perspective.
Yes.
And it has, of course, legal implication. And I thought that's quite interesting, because that's some of the basis for my own language is basically to always know the source of a piece of data, to always be able to backtrack, because my philosophy, let's say, or epistemology is that nobody has new idea. It's basically just recombination of all ideas, seeing things differently. But in the end, what I mean is it's never completely out of the blue. It's never like a purely white page. There are always references. There's always a library behind any new idea. And that includes code. Like, you never start with an actual blank page. You always import library of code. Your idea come from the inspiration of others, etc., etc. So a programming language where data lineage would be mandatory, where you cannot do anything out of nothing. So yeah, I'm starting to explore a bit this concept of data lineage, because I never encountered that before this weekend.
Yeah, very interesting. What do you think, Peter?
Well, I'd be inclined to use provenance instead of lineage, but
That sounds too French. You can't do that. Yeah, I do agree with Peter, just in terms of the current fashion of that kind of stuff. At the University of Southampton, there's been a lot of work on provenance, and that is the term.
also I think the legal community would get provenance more than they'd get lineage.
I think lineage might be slightly different in an interesting way. I wonder if that's what you mean, Fabian, by lineage. I would expect there to be changes like father, son, rather than provenance, which means original thing it can carry through.
Yeah, I'm not to be, again, I noticed this weekend, so I don't want to make it sound like I know what I'm talking about. But the idea being that I see everything as a phylogeny, as a tree with modification. So that's why lineage was particularly, like, it resonated with me. I thought, okay, that's nice because it's not just where a piece of data comes from, but and had modification, and maybe is also like the merging of two different or multiple pieces of data themselves coming from somewhere else. So I'm not, again, I put the link in the chat because it's totally new to me. Again, the wording and the work behind it is new, but yeah, and then how to make a programming language around that so that it's not just quote unquote philosophical idea, but it's something that can be leveraged, that can be used really on a daily basis, but still very, very early stage.
Okay, there is some work already done that you should track down. Now, unfortunately, I don't remember the title of the paper, but maybe like 5 to 7 years ago at the IBM Programmer Languages Day conference, there was a talk on using type systems to track provenance of data flowing through code. So if you do a search on IBM PL Day, you should be able to find the main page for the conference series. And then if you backtrack through the conference series by several years, you'll be able to get to the one that has that talk. And I think it should be intuitively obvious from the talk title which one of the sessions you should be looking at material on. Let me see if I can find you the page for the conference itself.
Hello, Brandel. Good to almost see you. And almost see you, Peter. And almost see you, Fabian.
Okay, here's the page for the conference series. You'll just have to go through that and you should be able to find the relevant talk if you look through each year's listing. I don't remember which one it was. I know it was a number of years back, but it was on point. And I think it had certainly a non-memorable title.
Yes, you have proved that. That's good by not remembering it. That's kind of funny. So, Brandel, how are you?
Good, good. I am speaking with a number of people about being able to either lead or at least constitute part of the new web experiences prototyping team network, which would be very valuable to me in terms of having the ability to work in the right way with the right people.
Sounds like it would be more beneficial to them, but there you go. Sounds exactly like your thing. Yes. It was on prototyping. It was really interesting. The last things that I did, which was of course very, very simple for the Vint page, just building that room and putting things around. It made, as obviously you guys are so aware, building and trying is completely different from talking, and lots of ideas of where to put displays. When something was floating in the air, I was shocked at how annoying it was. And when something was in a cylinder, it was just not referenceable. That wonderful book that you suggested, we have a look at, Brandel, really also pointed out that we need cardinal directions. We need things to stay in a certain place. All these things really became so apparent. So I think it would be really interesting here in this group to continue kind of the crazy experiments, which are super important, but also do a few really basic things. I don't think a lot of people outside of our community understand that some of the basic stuff is actually ridiculously useful too.
Yes, yeah, and the moreover, like the differences between what may make intuitive sense or seem promising and what what seems to work better. Yeah, I was telling a bunch of people at a work function sort of party earlier last week that the reality is that the things that we need to examine are actually really quite basic as well, and that we can get a lot of information from that, and that goes for novel sort of input systems in general, but very, very particularly within the context and task of information processing, reading and writing and understanding the sort of the role of text. It's all the more so, particularly because of the fact that the medium is currently dominated by graphics and gaming and all of these more sort of, shall we say, traditionally experiential and audiovisual kind of application domains. So yeah, I'm glad. I'm really excited that you've found ways to do that and to think through some of those things, because I think it's incredibly liberating personally for you. I would expect to have the ability to see some of those things through and go, so this is what some interactivity would do, but this is what it's like. And even being able to do, you know, like Apple famously does some of the best prototyping teams do their prototyping in Keynote, and perhaps there's not a Keynote of VR yet, but essentially using something more akin to Keynote than full-blown whatever else for prototyping, it's very likely to remain just as appropriate.
Yeah, absolutely. I read on the flight to Denmark today, I read something here that I think is kind of relevant to us, a brief section. And it's not about prototyping or VR, but it's something else that kind of connects everything. It's very, very obvious when, at least it became to me, but it wasn't before I read it. Anyway, evolution in animals puts a premium on coherent action. And from a certain point onward, the way to act effectively as a self is to have a sense of oneself as a unit of that kind. This sense of self is entirely tacit or implicit at first, but can become less tacit as the complexity of behavior continues to evolve. I just think that's a fantastically interesting perspective, because it goes obviously for societies as well as bodies. And then there's the second half. Alongside those ideas is another. As it turned animal bodies into these centers of sensing and action, evolution installed unique features in the nervous system that control these bodies. The basis for experience is not just a collection of cells that talk to each other in a network, but an organ with further kinds of activity and integration for distributed rhythms and fields and perhaps other large-scale dynamic properties. It's just quite a beautiful reminder of some of the work we need to do to build an ecosystem and something for this. Yeah. I'm going to try now this summer to really promote Author, to try to get some sales, and I will do it. The story will be computer science student didn't like the systems, redesigned it, .phd, because now I can use that. But sometimes very soon, I want to try to make Author for VR. And that really doesn't have to be a lot in the beginning. It can be simple. You go into a room and everything around you is the map. You know, do something simple and useful. So, yeah. I have not heard much from the Google people or anything, or Isabel at the Linnean, which is probably good, because obviously my head has not been very good over the last week after my friend passed away. I'm here in Denmark now for the funeral on Wednesday. On Friday, we went to the wake. And, well, before that, we went to the mosque, just my son and I, because there was no women, you know, one of those weird things. So we got to see him for the last time. It was good to be with my son there for that, for him to experience that. But anyway, been a bit heavy, but there you go.
Yes.
And none of this cuts down on the need to do what we're doing, I think. Just makes it ever more highlight the importance of.
Yes, yeah. A friend of mine recently got sort of in Apple parlance, it's disclosed on some more of the project that I'm have had the privilege to be working on for the last while. And I said, do you really think like this is a big deal? And I said, yeah, I believe that that having the opportunity to explore these paradigms is going to be the beginning of the next, at the very minimum, 50 years of computing, but possibly of the rest of the way that human beings have the opportunity to relate to information with and through. And you know, if anything is getting more challenging and imperative, it's the ability to understand things sort of quickly, but richly and through a multiplicity of means. And so any abilities that we have to cultivate and strengthen that capacity is amongst the most important work anybody can do in the present era. So yeah, I agree.
Ha, you're doing my level of hyperbole, even though I know that that's what you felt all along. It's nice to hear someone else using the properly flowery language. So yeah, we all agree on that point, extremely much.
Yes, it's essential. I mean, it's the same motivation that Bush weaves through as we may think, but you know, 75 years later, 77 years later, it's all the more important because at the same time the planet is also burning.
Absolutely. I wrote, I think it's probably 2 years ago now, an article on kind of a response to that I called it Arming the Citizenry, because if the citizenry does not have powerful information tools, we cannot fight all the bad information nonsense. And as you know, we're grateful to have a full Ukrainian family living with us. So we get their emotional news from home. And then, you know, the incredible support America is giving, you know, running out of stocks of your own things. Like, how in the world can we not take decision-making systems, thinking systems, and communication systems at the absolutely top of the pyramid of what has to be developed? Yeah, crazy. It has to happen somehow. But it's nice to hear you talking at that level of strong language to your colleagues. One of the problems in our earlier history was after Doug did his work, you know, a lot of his team went to Xerox PARC. And as they told me later, they admit that the technical challenges were more fun. You know, we can't afford that at the moment. It has to be a little bit of fun, sure, but it also has to be, what's the point? The lever, the Archimedes lever. You know, everybody's going to have these headsets in front of them. If we don't do something with actual work and actual communication, that lever will not be moved. So Fabienne, you had arranged for a wonderful speaker last Friday, which obviously was cancelled. She's coming back on Friday, which is fantastic. I'm not sure because things have been messy recently. Would you like to maybe reintroduce her to Brandel and Peter and of course to the video?
Yes, so she's an architect, but started for the last couple of years on working on the tooling of architects with VR. And the little difference compared to, so I haven't tried the architect tool, but the difference compared to most other architectural is the focus on trying things rather than just visualizing. So to make the tool, let's say I'm going to take a shortcut, but to let architect design directly in VR rather than design outside of VR and then preview in VR and then with the feedback iterate, but rather to be able to design more directly with a headset, knowing of course the limitation that a lot of the architectural work is going to be with a long time preview so that you can show the client something that looks a bit more polished or realistic. So with constraints like that in mind. But yeah, she's been giving some presentation and interview about VR from much broader perspective, not quote unquote just from architects, but in the end of VR as a tool to express yourself on pretty much any topic, being storytelling, being learning, being music or video or anything. So yeah, I think that was, if we take again the broader perspective of text, is the blueprint of an architect or a building made by an architect a form of text, or the annotation on such a blueprint text, is even the 3D representation of that building text. Our discussions as video recording on that building, on those annotation, also a form of text, even without even being transcribed, but even more so. So yeah, I introduced her a bit to the different profile of the groups on Friday to see a bit like, yeah, the different perspective, a mix of a researcher, prototypist, thinker, computer scientist, non-computer scientist, or rather a group of experts, but still with different perspectives. And that's it.
Does she have a profile on the web somewhere?
Yes, I'll put that in the chat.
And she's done a number of really great talks at places like the University of Washington virtual, was it Reality Lab, about the sort of the architect's perspective and perception of spaces as they relate to informing. So yeah, if text is too direct a word, then information is one that's absolutely appropriate for what it is that an architect manipulates in terms of people's role to an environment, and so it's a really great talk. I'll find that one.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the word text, the reason I was focused around the word text for so long is simply hardly anyone else was. But now that we're talking about VR, text absolutely in the widest definition, as opposed to before. I used to get annoyed when someone stretched text because that would be covered by other things. But for what we're doing here, I think the only reason we use the term text is the history of the group. You know, the architecture itself, the room you sit in, can of course be informationally useful in so many different ways. It's crazy. You know, the walls can change color based on certain criteria, blah, 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 etc., and so on. And that's all phenomenally useful.
But yeah, so many, I haven't seen all of these, and I actually need to go through and watch some of Reality Labs actual capstone classes and stuff like that, because they look pretty cool. But their talks are great. So the one by Sebastian V. Amengual is a fantastic sort of treatment of the absolute finest details of what audio needs to be understood as in the context of virtual reality. And David Smith was one of the sort of early pioneers of multi-user environments. So he has a lot of really great stuff to talk about there. Ken Perlin, obviously, is Ken Perlin. If you don't know Ken Perlin, he invented computer graphics. Well, he invented texturing in computer graphics, essentially. So yeah, really great videos. But the one by Andrea is very good from the really specific perspective of information and introduction into what kinds of stuff she'll be talking about.
Yeah, that'll be fantastic. I think we should invite more people in for that kind of presentation now. And I really hope, I know you're all about, oh, I don't know about the journal, but over time, I hope the journal can be a place people can go to for resources. It annoys me every time I see you putting great stuff on Twitter. It's like, we wanted to. So, you know, we have to scrape it, but it's better that it's somewhere than nowhere. Yeah. Hang on. Emily's asking if I'm on the call, so I'll say yes. She wasn't sure because of where I am and stuff. Because, you know, the very first computer text is unknown. There is a thought of where it might be. MIT, I know the name of the building, roughly the year, roughly the people, but it's gone. And so many things in the early hypertext days, it's kind of vague. So if we add to this, it's not just for historical things, but I think it helps us think, just to even write down or even do a prototype and then just basically document it saying, we tried this and it didn't work. Anyway, we've had this discussion many times. So it'll be interesting to see this. And also we've had a lot of all over the place things recently in the group. I think we should really just stay a nice, pleasant conversation space and invite some people in and just continue like that. I think that's good.
Yeah, another thing that I've kind of had a long to-do list and coming to the end of it. But one of the things that I'd be pretty interested in doing is actually thinking about some of the non-VR based text sort of manipulations that at least I was playing with several years ago, and think about if they are substantially changed by being taken into VR, or what other sort of opportunities lie in that approximate area. I don't know if you've seen my portfolio site, but it's got sort of a range of two-dimensional things, particularly at the end, and some discussion and summary of them as well. And I should read my own website. And yeah, there's a lot of rethinking writing in there that I think has some interesting possibilities. Why is it looking for information from play.google.com? I guess maybe YouTube, not sure. Yeah. Anyway, that's of interest to me.
No, that's good to hear. I mean, I'm interested in buying the new iPad mini. You know, just because VR is a big thing doesn't mean we should ignore the other media. Of course, things have to work through in a different ways. And I find it extremely fascinating what works and what platform and what doesn't. You know, why is Mr. Digital reading a piece of paper, right? It does have affordances that other things just don't, like, you know.
Right. Well, exactly. And I think we have the opportunity to change our relationship to physical media in a way that is much more fixed, or if not, then at least uncomfortable with digital stuff. Even on an iPad, you don't tend to bring it as close to your face as you can bring a book. Maybe because of the emissiveness of it. Maybe people have the ability to change that with a Kindle, but the fact that it's not bendy, the fact that it sort of feels implicitly more expensive or fragile, all of these things impact one's capacity somewhat negatively. Again, I was at this work event, and I was talking to actually the creative director for the marketing from Macintosh about how exciting this sort of new chapter is with the M1, the Mac Studio, and saying, like, this is really exciting to me because the Mac Studio is too much. It's ridiculous. It's an absurd computer, just as you kind of mentioned, because it's not even the Pro line. It's and they said that the top end of the Mac Studio, which, you know, is expensive, but it's what, like 12 grand, something like that, certainly no more than that, can run 90 million pixels. What does anybody do with 90 million pixels right now? And to me, the answer is not nothing, but nothing yet. And what I would be very excited in is and again, you know, this is not anything that I'm aware of within the context of the organization, but what I would be very excited by is taking really seriously the opportunity to decorate an entire environment, you know, with projection or with large panel displays, because, you know, with 90 million pixels, you can waste a few and you can throw them in all kinds of corners of a room. And so I take the concept, the brief essentially of immersive computing, not to mean head-mounted display, but to mean just that the totality of opportunity that comes from uncoupling the relationship to computer being one of sitting at mouse and keyboard or looking at a single monolithic display like an iPad. Certainly iPads and Macs and all of those kinds of machines or PCs have a role to play in that. But what's important is the fact that the interface is more expansive and more fluid in terms of the signals that it can take. The fact that we call them dialogue boxes is funny and sad. But the possibilities of being able to have something more akin to a dialogue are opening up in all sorts of fronts, and so it's worth exploring them on those places where they're arising.
I just had a brief chat with Bruce Horn right before this call. Of course, Brandel, he wrote the original Mac Finder, and for a long time, the Mac Finder was what you're talking about. Unfortunately, it was this small, but it was the idea of this is your environment. And of course, the Xerox parts, it turned out, found this out recently. I had little icons of people, could drag documents to them and they would get it. So it's the same dream. We just have the technology now to take it away from the little credit card and put it in the room, which is wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah. And those dreams also, I would argue CyberDog, I know, Peter, you're a fan, was a vision of that similar sort of document-centric environment. And you hear it sort of popping up. One of my favorites was actually at Microsoft, and it was probably even more ill-fated than CyberDog was WinFS, the Windows relational file system that had schema and representations for all of the different things that existed, so that the idea ultimately would be that Outlook, the mail app in a Windows ecosystem, was actually just a Finder, sort of a Windows Explorer view, because your emails would have a sort of a file representation, but also as would all of the senders, all of the people would exist in some sense as files, and we have the ability to kind of manipulate representations of people and emails in the same way that we currently have that ability with JPEGs and HTML files. Again, ill-fated, sort of came to absolutely nothing. Essentially, I think I haven't heard from anybody at Microsoft where they can sort of paint any kind of lineages like you guys were talking about earlier. But it was the first train that I caught on that line that I was really excited by and truly disappointed by the failure to deliver on. But yeah, Xerox had an incredibly kind of nuanced notion of what these iconic representations might be in support of, and I think it's really interesting to have the ability to kind of construct gestural languages and visual languages that allow for more persistent relationships like that. But I look forward to where it goes.
I want to show you where I'm sitting because I think it's relevant. So off this window, huge window, there's all these circling things. Relatively nice urban view. Some tables. Coffee bar at the end of the room, several tables, lots of walls and things.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to show you guys for two reasons. One, it's quite a nice place to sit and work, but it also, if this could be scanned and virtualized, which is one of the really exciting technologies, I think, not of AR, VR, but VR, where it's the physical environments that's scanned and it can look like anything, then this big, beautiful window could be useful, as well as all this other stuff. But I would still have the feeling of being in this, sometimes stare into the horizon, do the work, have access to information. It's going to be very interesting. I thought this physical place communicated that quite well. Yeah, it will be interesting, but it'll also, a lot of it will be social, and social will be important. obviously Doug Engelbart also felt that collaboration was key to work. A lot of companies are working on that, and we should too, but to think about also just the act of thinking, learning, and communicating is really, really hard when you have such opportunities. It's almost like an embarrassment of riches, you know. I do look forward to Blit's impression of our demos that we put on that page. And I do look forward,
Yes.
Peter, when you're ready for it too, to go into those specific things. So Fabian, question for you actually. In hubs powered by Spoke, I know I can have video, but can I have, is there any plugin or any way where I can have live monitor from my computer come in, like in Immersed and that kind of stuff?
So what, yes, kind of. If it's the current computer, yes, you can just share your screen. So that's relatively easy. And it's actually something that I used a couple of years ago, I think, where I had sharing my desktop to show, for example, documentation, and also sharing my webcam that was pointing at my keyboard. This way I could do the kind of an emulation or an equivalent of pass-through before it was a thing. But then it means you need two computers, one that does the computer thing, let's say, and the other for, well, just a VR headset, basically. But yeah, that works pretty well. What becomes a bit hairier is if you want to have multiple computers. So that's something I tinkered with a month or two ago about containers, where you can have, like, let's say, a dozen different computers isolated. But here, why I say it's a bit hairy is because you don't control them as easily as your current computer, because your current computer, you just type on the keyboard and then that reflects it. If you do have containers or remote computers, you need to write some kind of interface so that when you either point at them with a controller, then it makes the remote mouse move or this kind of things. Otherwise, if you're just watching, that works pretty well with a little delay. If you share your screen, I think it's a bit of delay, but let's say less than a second. If you share a remote computer, then it depends on the connection, but can be, let's say, up to 15 seconds, which if you look at documentation, it's fine. If you want something right away to interact with, it's not nice. So
one thing that you can do in Immersed now is you can set many multiple virtual monitors. So for my Mac, let's say I could have the normal, but also two on the side.
Yeah.
And that is controlled by the Mac. Can that be understood by hubs?
I'm not sure, because what you can also do is the default mode is you share your entire desktop, but you could share, like, let's say, 4 windows on your desktop. I think, but I'm not sure, to be honest. To be tried. I don't think so. Not easily.
So those companies like Immersed and similar, there seem to be quite a few of them. They give you multiple monitors in VR space. That's kind of proper coding. It's not easily modular, that kind of system, right?
I don't know if it's yeah, I haven't tried, so it's hard for me to say. I can relatively easily imagining, let's say you share your desktop and then you have your window and then you define areas and then you split the result in hubs. Instead of having, let's say, one texture, you have 4 textures and then you can move them independently. So that might work. But yeah, that's not out of the box. Just to say, it's not necessarily hard or uninteresting, but I know that from the hub's philosophy perspective, it's not something they want to focus on. So they want to focus on people chatting and manipulating 3D objects. That's, let's say, the basic primitive. The screen sharing, for example, even the webcam were added.
Writing's not that.
just because people insisted on it, but it was something that I think was postponed for as long as possible.
Yeah, those kinds of capabilities are pretty difficult to build at all. They're harder the further downstream you are of the operating system. So Oculus has had a go. I don't know if you've seen, Fabian, or where it's at this point, but at an Oculus Connect a few years ago, a number of years ago now, given how long we are since an in-person one, they had a VR API for being able to expose different windows as separate sort of panels and textures, such that they could be then re-represented and submitted into VR. And that was something that was written by Oculus to be sort of integrated into Windows applications in order to be able to make something like Substance Designer, not then purchased by Adobe, and Blender have the ability to create rich representations. So one of the things that would be possible but maybe challenging, especially with multiple streams, is you could use WebRTC streams to be able to expose subsets of your computer screen and represent those as panels that could then be independently manipulated within virtual reality. But I would say you're sort of at that point starting to go a little bit against the grain of what's being provided for you and how much work you have to do in order to make it happen. So it's not that the solution is to just wait for somebody to make a virtual reality OS, but yeah, it's going to be a challenging thing to do at full fidelity, and so maybe worth sort of thinking about what kinds of contexts you want to be able to reproduce for the purposes of prototyping, and thinking about what benefits flow from those before the substantially challenging engineering work is ready to be able to make those slightly higher fidelity kind of prototype propositions.
Yeah, that's very interesting. That's why I'm reversing the question back on you guys. Let's say that all of us soon start doing Oculus Quest thing, including you, Peter, and we do meet there generally, starting using workrooms or whatever basic stuff to begin with, or hubs, of course. But what are the sorts of things you guys would like to do in VR now in a meeting like we have right now? What kind of things should we be able to do?
I'll just, I heard the question, but just to give an example of manipulating any windows any way you want.
You don't have to answer it immediately, of course.
Yeah.
And I'm very much interested in what Fabian has to show here. I'm just saying, if there's anything we can do to support ourselves in hubs, that would be really interesting. So food. Spoiled, but there you go.
This one is so desktop, so it's an open source desktop window manager, like basically how you move your windows, resize, scale them, snap them together or not on Linux. So you can see maybe from the Steam VR, it's not for the Quest, it's for full desktop VR. But then you can grab your windows and you can even do the background itself, let's say, can be a VR application experience. So you can have something in 360 and still have your windows as overlay on top of, let's say, the VR experience. And here is the same example through the lens of my Valve Index, where you see as a background Valve Alex, and then a bunch of different windows, the console, some chat program, etc. So that's probably one of the freest way to manipulate windows and contents in VR that I've experienced, 2D and 3D. But it's
Fabian, are you speaking?
yes. You couldn't hear me much?
Back like this.
Okay.
I hear him.
I'll put the link in the chat, but yeah, just that's an example of.
Anyone have any comments on the? Well, Fabian tries to get, if he wants to, try to do that resharing. But anyone have any thoughts on what you want in VR? Oh, really? Brandel, can you speak now?
Yep. I mean, I don't have
Blah,
anything
blah, blah. I
prepared,
can't hear you.
but
Blah, blah, blah. Okay.
Yep.
Hang on. Okay, can you speak again, please? I changed my settings.
we're going to speak for an example, see if it's something that can be discerned by ears in a cafe somewhere.
Yeah, can hear you great now. How bizarre. Okay, just looking at that tweet.
Is it okay? Can you hear also?
I can hear you again now, yes. I
Okay.
hear you very well. How very odd.
Yeah, networking. So no, just sharing those examples, because if the goal is to manipulate Windows as freely as one wants, XR Desktop is definitely a great solution. It's complicated to set up. You need Linux and you need a VR desktop. It's not just a Quest. But then in terms of integration, like I was trying to show in those tweets, I have a terminal, I have native VR working, I have WebXR back then working, I have like overlay on top of a VR program running. So it was really, really quite powerful. And then again, because it's open source, you can also redefine those interactions. You want things to snap or not snap. It's a good way. And if it's, let's say, too complicated but worth it, it's still something that can be set up by one person in a lab or in a studio. It's not necessarily for everyone. It's definitely not the same audience as somebody who just grabbed a request from their box to play 10 minutes of Beat Saber. But then in terms of how you can manipulate information, window, interact between information, is it just a copy paste between 2D and VR? This is something you can do with that.
In addition to our kind of far out investigations, just to try to narrow it down for the sake of discussion, what kind of work environments do you guys want to have in VR first? Because none of us are working in VR all the time. So in addition to having better display and all that stuff, what kind of things would you want to be able to do in there?
I'm a big fan of the concept of context restoration as sort of described and discussed by Jim Holland. I think that the ability to replay a lot of activity and actions sort of comes back to something that, you know, Barbara Tversky says about how phenomenally kind of distinguishable a couple of random points are for once they're imbued with a real human motion, then we have an incredible ability not just to detect that it is human motion, but whose human motion. You know, if you put 10 dots on a person and it's a person you know, you will probably be able to identify them and realize who it is. And I think that speaks to and something that sort of evolutionarily has a tremendous importance and benefit to us. Because it means that we can recognize friend and foe. But yeah, I feel like if we have the ability to leverage that to be able to see, for example, ourselves doing things in spaces, you know, as you mentioned, your cafe space that you're in there in you said Denmark, that having the ability to see yourself do stuff would be phenomenal for the purposes of getting back into the headspace of what you were doing when you were last doing something, and being able to take that information space and transport it and be able to kind of be in a new place and have as rich an understanding of it as you would if you were in the exact same place that you would like to be to do all of that work. And better even, because you don't have the ability to turn back time and wind through some of those things in order to see it. So what I see there that is requiring as a consequence is the capacity to serialize and encode a much richer and deeper history cue of actions and the way that they were undertaken, not just for the purposes of being able to do undo, which I think is pretty neat, but also for the purposes of having a perspective of replaying actions for the benefit, for the cognitive benefits that confers. Being able to see those things and being able to kind of select and present and portray those to other users for the benefit of understanding. I think we get so much out of seeing other people do stuff well, that it would be a really wonderful thing for the sort of communication and discursive foundations of the medium, for people to see how people who compute good compute. If nothing else, it would make Twitch more interesting.
Interesting. Peter or Fabian, you have thoughts on this now?
Well, I've been buried in crystal macros for interacting with Tinderbox. So my head's sort of in that sub-project at the moment.
I was afraid you were going to say crystal meth.
Now, Crystal is a Ruby-like programming language that's compiled, and I'm using XPath to interact with the Tinderbox XML files, which are different technology I've been working with up until now. So it's taking a lot of trial and error and low-level poking around to get things under control. But when it's done, it'll be a useful utility that can be used in other applications.
Interesting. So Fabian, interrupt me if you're ready with a comment. But
Oh, and Fabian,
Oh.
Can I recommend to you an online community called Strumenta? And they have meetups on Thursdays at noon. And they're mostly focused on designing domain-specific languages. And last week's talk was on developing transpilers to implement new languages. So there's a ton of golden stuff on their website. So if you Google Strumenta, you'll be able to plug into that, and has tons of resources on building your own language that will save you a lot of reinventing the wheel.
But I might want to reinvent the wheel. I don't know yet.
Yeah, but it helps to know what the other wheels look like.
Yeah, sure. It's just that, let's say if I do something totally pointless in 6 months and I give up, but I have a deeper understanding of the whole tools chain, what a language is, to me, it would still be worth it. It would not just be a productive endeavor, but no, but thank you. I saw the link in the chat. What I also follow is the R programming language, the subreddit with a bunch of questions. And yeah, what I'll try to do is, like I do with all the prototyping, is build something out of it and then iterate and iterate and iterate, rather than what I have doing so far on that specific topic, which is to have grand ideas that might be pointless, or philosophical discussion that are definitely interesting and crucial to start, even to try to do something new. But yeah, I'll just start the, let's say, grind part. And ideally, I don't have the courage for that yet, but then also to do it in the open and show what I have built and the idea behind it, either there at the either Strumenta or maybe nowhere something or a local like conferences on programming language. I'll see. I'm not. It's new, so it's a bit scary, but it's exciting too.
Yeah, reach out to me anytime, because I'm really deeply embedded in that community and the general text and research for language design. So I can point you at stuff if you need it. But basically, let me know what your open questions are, and I'll guide you to the right resources.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
I'm a firm believer in not doing research before inventing. I think that's what you're saying you're doing, Fabian. And I think that one of the problems with education is that people generally tend to teach what is known, which is fine for some things, but obviously what we should try to teach is how to go beyond what is known. And that's why we should ideally, when faced with a problem, try to solve it with the most naive perspective possible in private, and then have a free space to share that. So that after that, obviously almost all of it, someone will point out so-and-so did this, so-and-so did that, which is great. Then you do the research, but otherwise, where in the world are you going to have the spark? I mean, this expression, standing on the shoulders of giants, that was sarcastic, right? That was a dig at his competitors when he said that. It wasn't it wasn't the way we quote it today. I see the coffee shop I'm in is closing now, so I'm gonna have to draw it just to close in a minute. But yeah, naive inventing, I think, is very, very useful. I don't know. What do you guys think? Is that what you'd mean, Fabian?
Yeah, that at some point, if you just do the research and if you just look at what others have done, you're going to push yourself in a corner of immobility. You're not going to try, and I don't think it's good. I think that, but it's a balance, of course. If you literally reinvent something that is the most famous thing ever and you don't learn from it, then it's a balance. But yeah, not just doing the research. I don't think it's enough.
When I had my Viva last week, which was, as my advisors called it, brutal. Hang on one second. I'm going to ask if I can have 5 minutes. Sorry, can I have 5 minutes? Thank you very much. They asked me some questions about some of the brain stuff because they felt it was a bit vague in my paper, and I said yes, it's vague on purpose because once I've read tons on the subject, but once I start using a specific vocabulary, then all I'm doing is digging into what is known. What I'm trying on that side of things is to ask questions. So remember the quote that I keep saying, truth kills creativity. If you know it's done this way, why in the world would you do it a different way? So it's really, really nice to hear you talk about this, Fabian, because I think that's the VR thing. Right now, we have to really hold dare our ignorance and not find out someone else did it this way, therefore it must be thus, because that's very bad, I think.
A quick thing also, I shared in the group on Twitter the GLTF to API or URL. I'll briefly, why do I insist on sharing it this now, even though what you'll have to leave very shortly, is because I think it's starting to make sense. So I'd be curious of everybody's idea there. So to clarify, on the left, I have a normal VR 3D page. On the right, I have Blender. And behind the chat, I have a property. And one of the, let's say the trick, is one of those property is a URL. And that URL can be, here it's the JSON file, but can even be an API. And the idea is that you have your 3D object, the visual representation, but you can also add information to it, update it, or just read it. And then you can add here the text on top is pulled from. And so the idea is that you have your GLTF, but it doesn't have to be just visual. And yeah, it just works. It's nothing extremely complicated. It's actually pretty straightforward. But I think in terms of interoperability, bringing objects in and out of VR, because they have to be 3D in order to have manipulation.
Yeah, nice to see. I'm a bit distracted here. I gotta go. Will you guys stay a little bit longer? Or are you also going to be busy? Shall I leave the room running?
I'll have to run away, but yeah, if you have ideas on how to extend, let's say, representation and metadata and whatnot, including APIs.
I have to get back to my crystal macros
on Friday. Fabian, to help me out, can you please send me an email with a brief paragraph that I should send the whole group about Friday's lecture, or guest presenter rather? That would be really, really useful right now. Thanks very much. Okay.
Okay, see you Friday.
Good a week as you can, everyone. Thanks for today.
Yeah.
Very, very happy to see you.
Thanks.
It makes a big difference for me. Bye.